Hi there. You're listening to the Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Thanks for staying with me. Today is the last episode of the podcast before we start the tale of the Cloverleaf Lord. I will be reading the epilogue and the author's note, the conclusion of what became of our beloved characters, as well as my own personal thoughts when writing this book. Now let's get started. The summer was ours. When I strolled to the park that following morning, breathing in the fresh air, I felt renewed. The sun seemed just a little brighter. The leaves seemed just a little greener than yesterday. The trees appeared to even stand taller. I had arrived before everyone else. The sun was just peeking past Queen's Summit. I stared blankly at the wicker throne Caitlin had occupied for so many seasons. I could see where her nails had dug into the arms, and the wood had worn away. I wondered how many monarchs had sat on that throne. The vacant treehouse lay unoccupied in the distance. The trees around the clearing wavered in the morning light, and I knew I was home. It was a rather busy day when everyone did arrive. Ben had surprised me with an entirely new throne. He had borrowed a grand chair from his family's patio and opted to sit on the old throne. I must continue the meadow tradition and sit on the wicker throne, I insisted, even though I was tempted by the grandness of this new chair. Ben, as my king, sat on his patio chair beside me. The first and most crucial task was to renew oaths of fealty. This happened each time a new lord, lady, king, or queen rose to the throne, but would be on a grander scale. Considering the old regime was tossed out the window, an entirely new aristocracy had to be anointed. Isn't it obvious that those within my inner circle shall be promoted? I told the crowds of kids who had gathered before my throne. Cora, Matthew, Tyler, Cassidy, Mark, and all those who helped out in their greatest efforts will be rewarded justly. I wore my new plastic crown the entire ceremony, standing only to touch the bowed shoulders of each person and anoint them in their new position. I had chosen to wear a summer dress of red, with a blue sash across my chest. Ben stood near me, smiling all the while. Both Tyler and Matthew had been appointed joint majordomos. With their expertise together, I knew they would do the job without fail. The disgraced Alice Thompson had run off with the rest of the old nobility, so I gave the birch trail to Cora. She smiled greatly as I bestowed the honors. Our prideful leader, Sassy Cassie, refused many of the honors I tried to give her, but she did accept the position of Lady Spymaster. The position dates back to at least Queen Elizabeth I informed her. You'll be responsible for uncovering any secrets and plots against the realm, and those that threaten the sovereign, I winked. Cassidy had smiled and stood off to the side as Mark walked along the aisle. Mark Glass, the revolutionary who had been waiting for this day, knelt with great pride. I gave him exactly what he was entitled to, the Lost Forest. Arise, my new lord and duke of the Lost Forest, I smiled brightly. As for Sunset Town, where I hailed from, I gave Madison the mayoral position. I knew she'd be able to rally the kids and lead them well. It had not been a tough decision on who to give the duchy to. Ben, as well as my king, would rule as the Duke of Sunset. No one, except myself, knew more about the village, and I knew he would be able to rule it justly, even if he was perched near me. The rest of those who supported us came back as knights and dames, minor lords and ladies, and so on and so forth. My sister in particular was given a keen role, helping Tyler and Matthew with the military. I made her a lady commander. I intended to use the summer to form a powerful kingdom, perhaps the most powerful there had ever been in the meadow. It was not until the beginning of August that our kingdom flourished fully. The flowers and the trees were at their grandest, and the realm looked full and plentiful. I strolled along the path towards the Lost Forest, dressed in my crown and carrying my scepter. I walked alone. In this realm I had no need for guards or for soldiers. We were at peace. Those who saw me bowed deeply and blessed me warmly with a "Long live the Queen" gesture. I smiled in their wake and adjusted my glasses. I found the forest in a much better condition than I had left it a couple weeks prior. Mark had been very sick over the summer, so his chosen heir had fumbled the responsibilities. Since he was back, things were looking chipper. "Well met, my lord," I called to him. Mark was in the jungle gym playing around with the boys. Your Radiance, he bowed deeply. I turned to see a familiar face toiling in the dungeons under the slide. Still paying your debt, are we, my old Lord Ashton? I laughed. It's actually just Mr. Smith now, or Ashton, he sighed. I nodded. Considering he had not died in the rebellion, Ashton was not guaranteed a restart. What brings you? Mark took me away from the prisons. We strolled along the birch promenade and out near where we could see the water's edge. Across the pool of water were houses, tall and bold. I am merely checking up on you. Matthew's responsibilities seemed to slip while you were ill. I know, I had a talk with him, Mark said frankly. Things are going well again. Have you heard from Gabrielle at all? I asked. I have, he answered with a smile. She emails me every now and again, living in Edmonton now, or was it Calgary? I cannot remember. Anyway, she says she is coming for a visit before school starts again. Isn't that exciting? I clapped my hands like a child. Yes, it is. Very exciting. It will be nice to see her again. We spoke for a little while longer about the forest, and then I strolled back to the capital. The sun was still hanging in the middle of the sky, and I stopped to take a look at some clouds. Even after all this time had passed, it still all felt like a dream. It still felt like Venus was ruling with a fist of iron, and that Lord Schuyler would be popping out of somewhere with his guards and their blades. I decided to take a rest and sit on the grass. I laid on my back and began to watch the clouds as they floated by. Slowly they floated, and I began to imagine. You're probably wondering what happened to a few other kids in our meadow, primarily the bad ones. To our recollection, we never did see Caitlin at the meadow again, at least during my reign. I saw her at school sometimes, but she stayed well away from me. Hudson Shepherd came crawling back at the beginning of fall, just when the leaves were touching the ground. Begging for forgiveness, I appointed him as a royal attendant to His Majesty the King, between my giggles. While he did the job without a smile, I could tell he was glad to be back in the meadow. As for Schuyler Thompson, he remained away as well. I presumed he and Caitlin went to another park and began a new kingdom there, but I cannot be certain. They stayed away together. Lady Chloe MacDougall was given a restart, and now, stripped of her royal status, was hired as a maid at my castle. The only noble who was actually willing to start over with a smile was Kevin Cooper, who, after spending a lengthy week in prison, became an upstart in the military. The former Majesty's butler was reborn again, but this time as a herald, a job he had always wanted, and the herald became the new butler. In those first few months, it was all jumbled and mixed. Roles were reversed, the kingdom was put upside down. Yet, in the end, things became much better than they were before. On a bright summer afternoon, as the leaves were yielding to yellow and orange, Ben placed his hand on mine. The summer had come to an end, and autumn would soon be here. The season itself had ended, and what a turbulent season it had been. We would all quit the game for the winter months and resume our play in the spring. "What is it, Ben?" I asked. "Do you think you'll be here next spring? You're almost 15, Jessica. William left the meadow before he was that age," he said. I looked at him blankly and blinked. I had not given it much thought, really. I had always imagined the loss of imagination to take hold of me, but I suppose I was different. It was usually children and teens around my age that this sort of thing happened, and the bright luminosity of the meadow faded into black and gray. You didn't see the world through a child's eyes anymore. You became an adult, a teenager, and saw things differently. "I should think I'll be here," I said thoughtfully. "The meadow needs me. I am their queen." "This is good to know," he replied quickly, "for I cannot think of Everglade without you, my dear." He kissed me on the cheek, and I blushed. Yes, the loss of imagination was truly the greatest harm a child could face, and I do admit that I researched such a thing. There were, however, a very choice few who could retain their childlike outlook on life while still being mature. I felt like I was one of those people, for despite my age, I still viewed all our play as real. I remembered then when William had chided me in the hall for still playing the game. Even now, when I think back to that day, I feel the same. Something, however, had changed within me. I had become a stronger, more courageous person. I learned to open up and become friendlier. I learned how to rule, how to dictate, and how to become responsible for more than just myself. Caitlin had said some very interesting words before the majesty inside her died. "Uneasy lies the head who wears the crown," she had mumbled, an old Shakespeare line from one of his many plays. Well, it all registered with us, none more so than me. In my own opinion, I think that perhaps the crown is only uneasy on the heads of people who rule unjustly, for the spirit of a happy and healthy Everglade has made my head light and airy. I feel no pain, no anguish, no regret, and no sadness. I only feel happiness and vibrant when I arrive in my realm. "I'll be here," I said to Ben. "Do not worry, I will not be going anywhere any time soon." "Good," he said again. "There is lots to be done, but perhaps next season." "Yes," I grinned. "Next season for sure." That concludes the first novel, Memoirs of a Neighborhood Queen. I will now be reading the author's note. Author's note, August 2023. Hello again, reader. Memoirs comes fixed in its masterful final form in the Gold Edition, the one that you have just completed. There were some grammatical and storyline issues that needed resolving, and I felt like tidying it up a little bit. If you read one of the other editions, you will find that hardly anything has changed. I didn't switch any names, only titles, and added a few more details. It has been almost 3 years since this novel was published at the time of this recording, and I have to say that I have come a long way in my writing. You will find that the writing and style gets better with each novel, and the best being, in my opinion, the final, Diaries of a Departed Queen. Jessica is a fiery hero as always, determined as ever to help her friends. As of right now, there are no plans to expand Jessica's universe. This is the end of the Everglade Chronicles. Perhaps, in the future, I will revisit it as I have started some other tales that can be linked to Everglade. For example, I wanted the 4th book to feature Hudson Shepherd. I was also writing an origin story for King Thomas, but most of that material made its way into Caitlin's story. I hope you have all enjoyed this edition, for I felt like it needed to happen. As I have been writing more, I am feeling the need to go back and revise older works. I was also prepping a new podcast, the one that you're listening to right now, to further spread the Everglade Chronicles, and found Memoirs to be in a rather weak state. I owed it to Jessica and her friends to revise and fix their stories. You can, of course, read the original author's note just below here. I'm all finished. I will now read the original author's note that was written when the book was originally published. Memoirs has been a long and rather exciting novel for me to write, and I thank you for reading it. I had wanted to explore the curiosity and triumphs that face the children of today, given that I myself was a child of great imagination. None so much in my generation have children become sucked into tablets and video games. It is nice and refreshing to imagine a simpler world when children possessed great fantasies and played outside. The story of Jessica was born from my love of history and royalty. I wanted to create a world of pure imagination, of pure pretend, but of aspects so real to the players. Children do say such funny things, and are often influenced through a variety of mediums. While modern children, and even those of the past, may not speak like those that do in the meadow, I feel it was necessary to emphasize the importance of imagination and free thinking. I based the meadow on a place that I used to go to quite often when I was living in that neighborhood, during a time when I first began writing this book. It was this large, man-made island structure surrounded by a faux river. Imagine that, an entire quote-unquote meadow created for the simplistic reason of pleasing the suburban dwellers around it. It had an old playground in a dense forest, almost natural and untouched by human hands. I pictured it as the same place as the meadow. It even had 2 bridges connecting it, in the north and the south. I knew this would be the perfect place for Jessica and her friends to unwind after school, to come and play some silly King in the Castle game. It is entirely detached from the world, yet surrounded by suburban homes. Jessica and her friends experience a variety of feelings and mediums during their escapades in Everglade. They are often restricted by bothering mothers and schoolwork, but often seem to carry on with their duties in the meadow as if nothing has stopped them initially. They treat things with a degree of realism, a degree of severity. You'd think all the young ones would get along in the meadow, but certain castes and peer systems set them apart. Jessica, as a young and intelligent girl, has a grasp of this system. Even those who do not seem to understand the hierarchy know their eventual place in society. She is always well aware of who to give the most courtesy to, while her love interest Ben seems to struggle with it. Even the haughty little Hudson knows his place is above those of the common children in the fields. In the end, however, justice and courage triumphs, and the children seem to learn lessons of nerve, determination, and teamwork. Cassidy is relentless in her determination to see Venus dethroned, and Mark tries his best to follow the will of the forest's previous ruler, Gabrielle. The idea of this Gabrielism is a common theme amongst the forest dwellers. They see her as a demi-goddess of greatness and prosperity. Despite all of this, she is never seen in the narrative. She is only mentioned with phenomenal praise. In addition to the famous Gabrielle, other notable heroes of the Everglade lore are mentioned, primarily Christopher the Great and the former monarch King Thomas. While the children have no formal written history, characters like Mark and Jessica seem to remember their stories. It is through these oral traditions that the history of Everglade is preserved and passed on. Not to mention that both Mark and Jessica have been playing the game for quite some time, and were apparently present during the reign of at least King Thomas. The idea of losing one's imagination was explored as well, and I felt that I should touch on the idea. As many of us would know, we all become adults at some point and find games like King in the Castle, Doctor and House all trivial as we grow older. Jessica and several others struggle with this idea. They are torn between acting like teenagers should and still retaining their creative, imaginative, childlike streaks. Jessica in particular has a nasty encounter with her former crush, Will, who chides her for, quote-unquote, not acting her age. Other children of relative age, such as Caitlin and Mark, also tackle the same issue of growing up and battling with their imaginations. They are torn between the idea of leaving the childish game behind or choosing to become adults. In fact, many characters reference to the fact that Caitlin is attempting to stay relevant and reinforcing that she is still competent enough to rule. Many would believe she is too old to still be their sovereign. She even goes as far as telling Jessica that she is too old to still be playing the game. Nonetheless, Jessica evidently proves to herself that she can have the best of both worlds, that she is fully capable of being an intelligent teenager and retaining her childlike imaginative outlook. Others were not so lucky. The next novel in the series will indicate how well the others have held on. Jessica and her friends are now happy, living in a golden world. Well, that is the end. That is the end of the first novel. Thank you again to my many readers, and thank you for welcoming children's imaginations into your lives once more with this novel. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stay tuned in January 2024 when we start the second book, The Tale of the Cloverleaf Lord. And then, after that, we will begin the final novel, Diaries of a Departed Queen. Enjoy your holiday season and have a happy new year. Shimmer by Captures provides the music. Find us online on Facebook by searching The Everglade Chronicles or at Everglade Chronicles on Instagram. I appreciate your support. If you're interested in purchasing any of the Everglade Chronicles novels, you can find them exclusively on Amazon. Thank you and see you next week.